Welcome to the Falling Walls plenary table, Data for Health.
Well, hello everyone here at this Falling Walls 2021 Circle Plenary Table, Data for Health. I'm going to start right off the bat and say I'm a little bit overwhelmed right now by the sense of positivity from the previous session. I'm going to bring in some darkness now. It's just my natural disposition. Now, for those of you who haven't been before, well, first of all, shame on you, but I should tell you that Falling Walls Circles, these discussions are an opportunity for scientists, researchers, for business, for policymakers, and indeed, perhaps forced through the pandemic, through digital outreach for the entire public to get together, discuss ideas, exchange ideas, and perhaps find some solutions for what may become our futures. We want to talk about data for health. That's a huge topic, data for health, starting right down with the definitions. We're not probably going to have time to get into the reads totally, but we'll do our best to get you all thinking and inspired. On our panel, and excuse me, I've opted for rather compressed introductions here so we can maximize time for speaking. I'd like to start with Jeanne Kehren of Bayer. I can welcome you to the circle. I was going to say the stage or the round table. Round of applause, please. Thank you. Next, we've got Erwin Böttinger of the Hasso Plattner Institute. Jeff Dachis of OneDrop. Markus Kalliola of the Finnish innovation fund Citra. And Gottfried Ludewig of the German Federal Ministry for Health, or of Health. Welcome. And I'm Zulfikar, Abbany, a senior science editor at DW, Germany's public international broadcaster, and that's enough about me. Now, I'm going to sort of venture over to the table here, I think. I'm just going to risk it. Shall I put this microphone down? No, I'm going to take it with me right now. The microphone's gone off. That's wonderful. Here we go. Lotus organs, I've been told. So, we wanted to start off with an opening question. And, you know, all the best laid plans go awry. I had a plan. In the wind it goes. Right, okay, so the opening question was, for everybody here, was what data-driven innovation has been most useful for public health over the past 20 years? I'm trying not to prejudice your answers, because I've read them, or versions of them. Jeanne, can I start with you, please?
Thank you. I think what happened was the ability to really generate very large amount of data and to be able to integrate them. And thanks to also the progression of the computing power to finally being able to use them. So generate and be able not to wait 1 week for an analysis were the major changes. Excellent.
Now, I like your glasses, so how about you go next?
Oh, thank you, thank you. So mobile computing, I think very clearly, that is what people experience the most as the advance in digital health through their smartphones, through sensors and wearables, through applications, health apps, and algorithms all being connected in the palm of your hand. That has proven to be effective in preventing pandemic and epidemic infectious problems. That has certainly opened up new healthcare delivery services in low and middle income countries, and there's tons of excitement there. And we have also paths to new therapeutics that are not chemical and not biological digital therapeutics that can be delivered through smartphones and mobile computing. And so I think this is my opening statement.
Fantastic, thank you. Let's move around to the entrepreneur here, right? Jeff Dachis, over to you.
Pleasure, thanks for having me. The mobile internet was my technology, I think, focused primarily on the biggest impact in population health. Access to information, you know, people have unprecedented access to information in ways that they've never had before. Access to communication. So the ability to communicate not only with each other, but with communities of interest, and then with physicians and or other participants in healthcare. And then, all of the types of mobile applications that you just described, enabling people to care for themselves in ways they've never seen before, extremely powerful sensors, and enabling all kinds of biometric telemetry on your body that people have never had before. So sensing, communication, and access to information.
As your sort of quasi-host, let's go over here as a national sort of element here. Markus.
Yes. So we followed the panel this morning, and we heard a lot about the gene technologies. And that would be my answer. The sequencing technologies have developed very rapidly within the last 20 years. The Human Genome Project finished 2003, costed billions of euros to sequence the first human genome. And now we do it with $1,000. And that has advanced both the primary and the research community.
Gottfried.
Well, I think already everything's said, because mobile computing, no, to be very honest, mobile computing, that's it. I mean, the people really experience healthcare on their own, not from the system, just via sensor technology, doing sports, doing whatever they want to. But that's really changed their attitude on how to measure yourself, on how to experience healthcare. And I think this via mobile and this everything on your phone, actually, this changed the whole perspective on healthcare tremendously.
Thank you very much to all of you. Now, I've been a little bit remiss here because it actually falls on me to tell everybody here our structure here. So we've had our opening question, everybody. What we're going to do now is have an open debate, and that will go for about 30-odd minutes, and then we'll welcome questions from you here in the audience, but also digitally, and I hope we get as many questions as possible. But I'd also like to involve you right now, our audience members. I mean, having listened to the perspectives just now, thinking about where the various people come from, their perspectives. And if you need to remind yourselves, look up there at the screen where our panelists come from. They're all sort of in innovation, data-driven innovation, digital technology. Do you feel that those perspectives make sense? Do you recognize them as things that you would expect from people in government or at high-ranking institutes or funding institutes, entrepreneurs? What do you think? Just raise your hand, a yes or no. Do these perspectives fit, or do you agree with them? How about we see, do you agree with these sentiments? Raise a hand. Don't be shy. Yeah, that's a couple of hands. That's good. Okay, so you agree with, so we're sort of got a bit of a consensus here. Don't worry, you can shout out as well, with a mask as well. So look, here's my opening salvo here, in a sense. I think that we need to go a little bit deeper, because often, in listening to you, so we talk about things like data as though it were a known entity. We talk about doing things in healthcare for the good of everybody, as though that were enough. I wonder whether we're talking deeply enough about what data means, what it means for researchers and what it means for policymakers, business, but then on the other hand, the other side, for the general public. And I wonder if I can make this analogy here. How about we start viewing human health data as a human organ? Because if we think about donating organs, we still have a right about whether we want to share that during life and after life. But with data, it's kind of presumed that we should all be sharing everything all the time. And I want to know whether that's, from your perspectives, whether that's the real revolution that we need to be talking about in order to fix situations and also progress to new solutions in the future. Is data, health data, a human organ? And should we view it as such? Who's looking at me most skeptically? I'll ask you first. It's either Jeanne or Jeff.
Well, I mean, somewhat I like the analogy. But the difference with an organ is that if you give it to somebody else, you don't have it anymore for yourself, which is a bit the difference with data. The data are remaining yours. I like the parallel because also what I've seen, I worked in my previous life a lot with the transplant community. People are extremely motivated to donate or to share other people facing really the tough problems. So being faced with disease, being faced with really challenges, helps you to share your data, or give something, or give blood, or give bone marrow, because you have this higher sensitivity. So it's something which is part of you, and it's part of your being, but you can share it without losing it.
Are you sure that your data is always yours?
Well, some of them are.
Isn't in a sense data what you do with the data? I mean, Jeff, you're from the entrepreneurial side.
Yeah, we run a data platform, and what we like to tell our users is that we're really all in this together. The only way that we all get better is by everybody contributing, as some part of the process. However, with data privacy and security being paramount for almost everybody, it's really important that people have the opportunity to opt in to that. But I think, what you're seeing with, again, inexpensive sensing on mobile phones, watches, all the different types of sensors that are out there, you're starting to see people realize that there's an extreme benefit to them by contributing their data to a system that allows them to extract actionable insights that they can take health action on. And
Gottfried, from your perspective as, from politics, does that work, this opting in? Do people know what they're opting in to?
I think it's our approach, right? I mean, we, for example, in Germany implement from the statutory health insurance companies an electronic medical record, and obviously it's an opt-in system. And we obviously try to push that forward and to explain it to them. But answering to your question, I think it's also a different question. For Germany, we're living in a system which is financed and which is supporting you from a really solidarity from the whole population. And I think it's also the question being raised, isn't it a kind of responsibility also to share my data to create a better outcome in the healthcare system for patients who are actually, need this help. And this is a perspective, it's my data, and it's an opt-in question. But I always would like to raise awareness about the question, if I'm healthy and I'm living in this system, isn't it my responsibility also to help the people who are ill and who could really, who could really benefit from us sharing our data already today? And this is something I would like to keep in mind, also obviously from the politics side, from the academia side, but also for each and every individual. One day you could be ill, and you could benefit from data sharing. So this
Gottfried, I'm terribly sick this minute.
Yeah.
But let me just add to that. I think, what's the big deal if we share our health data, or really our actionable data, our what happens on our mobile phones with other people? Really, where it gets to be a problem is if there are organizations that are discriminating against us for some health situation that we have. So as an example, I have type 1 diabetes, and if a health insurance company is discriminating against me or raising my premiums or not allowing me to have coverage that I normally would have been able to had they not had access to that data, that's really the issue here, is who's using the data, and are they discriminating against somebody, by taking advantage of that? And
that's my point. I mean, in the area of research and funding, how do you see that as well? I mean, surely there's a base discrimination against certain types of research and where you can put your money, who's backing it. In that sense, we don't own our own data, do we?
Well, I come from a bit different cultural background as we are in Finland. We have for decades, we have had this opt-out model. And a year and a half ago, we established a new agency which actually grants the permission to use health data for research. And it has this opt-out model. Out of 5.5 million citizens, around 200 has opted out. So we are really in favor. We trust our government and the researchers to do good with the data, and I think it works.
I would like to second that and sort of take a little bit of contrarian position to the opt-in approach. I mean, we've certainly had this conversation at length and very deep and very passionate in the context of introducing the privacy-preserving tool for contact tracing in Germany, the Corona-Warn-App, which is a very nice development, by the way. But again, I could have argued that the opt-in approach is not going to achieve the level of adoption in the population to have the impact that we really paid and hoped for. And so opt-out, mind you all, opt-out is voluntary. You know, it's provided and you can turn it off and you're done with something like a Corona Warn app. It's voluntary as well. And so I just would like to make that argument. And when we talk about adoption of digital tools that enable data to be shared and flowing and support research, monitoring care, then I think at a population level, tools that are broadly put in place, like the electronic health record and things like that, an opt-out approach is something to be considered.
But I'm picking up the sort of sense that you need to have a certain level of dictatorship with data, because actually opting in and opting out doesn't really work, because everybody's got the choice. And if it's all about the benefit of everybody, I mean, we've seen this with the pandemic, that you can, for instance, say we have so many infections around the world, but at the same time, we can't necessarily say how many deaths were directly related to SARS-CoV-2, because people are all collecting data differently. And this is a sort of, I'm, you know, sort of progressing in my sort of, my narrative in my head here, because if we have an overarching system that is supposed to benefit everybody, then it needs to be true in every country, at every level. Everybody has to opt in, particularly in a situation like a global pandemic, such as we're still living through. Otherwise, you're not going to get the data that can truly help everybody. And then you have this issue of security, because a society has all sorts of players. Like you mentioned, you've got commercial interests, you've got public interests, you've got government interests that may be running up against an election or not, all sorts of stuff like that. So how do you feel, I mean, are we really being honest enough with the public when we have commercial confidence over how your data is being used, or our technology platforms, etc.? Are we being truly honest? Should we not just say, look, your data doesn't belong to you, privacy was a fallacy, security is a fallacy, your data is ours, we borrow this planet, you borrow your body and your life?
Well, I think the three principal dimensions when we talk about data for health that should govern the communication with people in the population at every level are privacy, security, and ownership. And that pretty much covers the major dimensions of this whole thing about data. And we have in Germany in particular the German angst about data and data sharing. Yeah. And I think an honest conversation about privacy, how it is protected, security, what measures are you taking to protect the data, and ownership, who owns the data? Are you owning the data? Who is making some benefit of it? Is it research, and so on? Which type of research? So that all needs to be communicated transparently and upfront to generate trust. The big issue with data for health is trust.
And I think it's a problematic we are extremely familiar with in the pharma industry, because if you think about it, it's the same kind of contract we make during clinical trials. It's an informed consent. You don't force people, there is an informed consent, and you know what you are agreeing to, and you can go out if you want to opt out. At one point, the privacy and the security are absolutely mandatory. But the aggregated data at something which becomes a bit more distant from the individual. Once you consented, they are in the pool, they are anonymized or de-identified. It's something that is a bit more detached from the individual. Still, you can withdraw. And we do that all the time. You have somebody in a clinical trial and that person decides he doesn't or she doesn't want to do it anymore, they can go out. I mean, there is something to work on that. I would like to bring also, sometimes we are extremely nervous about those issues and we think, the public is going to react like this and the public is going to think that. I remember the early days of genetic testing and sequencing, also in clinical trials, with a lot of discussions with all the health authorities and all the ethical committees, where people were extremely nervous and the patients are not going to accept that. And the next thing we realized is that people were swabbing their mouth, putting that in a super secured paper envelope, and receiving super secured results on a cell phone with no protection on their genotype. there's not the same level of sensitivity sometimes as what we think. People are afraid indeed of discrimination. They're afraid of what we may not tell them or what may hurt them. But globally, if you tell, in my past experience, if you tell to patients or to people, you are going to contribute to the advancement of this problematic or that problematic, they are usually extremely, extremely happy to share and extremely happy to help.
Markus, you wanted to say something?
Yes. Regarding all this privacy and these legal issues, I think we are doing pretty bad job in Europe at the moment. I coordinate a project of 25 European countries who are giving options for the European Commission on creating new guidelines and rules for the secondaries of health data in Europe. And we hosted a forum of that more than 50 European projects participated, which are doing this work. And each of them said that they have had problems with legal uncertainty. Now, we have top researchers in Europe who should focus on finding cure for diseases, having problems with the privacy, which should be like a fundamental thing that is solved, and then the researchers can do a good job on top of that. If they have to come together and the first 6 months they think, like, how do we solve this privacy? It's a missed opportunity, and it's slowing down research, it's slowing down the improvement of health. And I think we should finally get these fundamental questions answered so that Europe can go forward. And now today we are not succeeding in this, and I think it's a big problem.
Thank you. I just want to, if I may, I want to see if I can turn around to our audience here, in the round here. When you hear the word data, what do you think? Health data. What is the first thing that comes to your mind? Can you just shout out a word? Just don't worry about it being rowdy. EHR. Sorry? EHR. Anybody else? Sequencing. Okay. Anybody else? Security. What about the data about yourself? I mean, I shouldn't really say this. Sorry, Dad. My dad's in hospital, right? 2 weeks in, the doctor says, you are 70% better. Exactly. My sentiments exactly. How do you know? So that's what I think about data. Or are we talking about data that, for instance, a tiny device can track neurodegenerative developments like a heart monitor? Is that the sort of data that you might be interested in? Yes? No? Yes. Excellent. Okay. When you're researching, when you're developing, when you're forming policy, are you on the same page? Admittedly, this is not the general public. We're all sort of the choir here, right?
Maybe.
Are you on the same page?
Yeah. Generally, yeah.
Generally. It's been tested, has it?
No, I think all the things mentioned, whether it's sequencing or security, or privacy, or EHRs, all of those things are relevant to the conversation. So I think we're definitely on the same page. I think, but different organizations take different approaches to all of those things.
Okay. I think you're making a very interesting point, which is a critical question. You've got new data type, like sensor type, genetic, genomic, and so on. But we need to put them in relation to the clinical reality. And that's the big challenge, because if somebody is looking at a genotype, it doesn't tell you how you feel. It doesn't tell you directly what is important and what is not. No, we need to put all those data together to really make sense, both for research, discovery, innovation, but also for the people, what is in it for them to help them drive their health.
Can you give us an example of that? Because it's partly what we're doing here is this science communication, as it's said, called. How do you convey that to a patient who's lying in a hospital bed, confused, that we've got this novel medicine here that you could use. It might help you, it might not help you, but you'd benefit other people. How do you convey that, or how do you convey the statistics on their chart to them? How do you convey properly that you're 70% better than you were 2 weeks ago? Can you give us an example, a concrete idea?
I mean, if you want the most dramatic example is at one point we identified the BRCA1 and 2 mutations in cancer, and then you're able to explain to somebody that there is a very high risk of developing ovarian or breast cancer. But what we are going to do next is we are going to provide you with this kind of support, which means regular exams, regular monitoring, and it's how we are going to manage your way forward and making sure we don't miss anything and we control that risk. It's basically what we do to address your problem. It's not just sharing data, because people don't know what to do. They want to know what's the next action. I mean, and it's a very difficult conversation to have, but it gives at least on, how you are going to manage your life going forward. What does it mean for you?
Please, Markus?
Yeah.
Yes, I just think that the healthcare is going towards science fiction. I mean, I don't understand what they're doing in the hospitals, and I don't think I even should understand it. I mean, my understanding should not limit the healthcare professionals and the science go forward. I don't understand how the airplane is going, but I flew here. And I think we should have this mentality for how you're using health data in pharma and in the healthcare. But for me individually, I think the health is going towards what you are doing in OneDrop, and what I have in my wrist, my finger, this Aura ring. And the gamification, the consumerization of health, in 10 years' time, I will understand my health in ways that we don't imagine today. And that is the future. And that you're doing a good job in Germany regarding this Digital Healthcare Act, taking digital therapeutics into markets. And but I think this gamification and the mobile phone will be the access point for your health, not the local healthcare facilities. So I think this is the big change.
Yeah. Isn't that a gloss? Sorry, but I'm terribly rude, I know, but we all come around. The gamification, this iPad, it has a bunch of games on it, right? And I feel that, the idea of gamification, it does sort of cloud what's really happening, the ads that are being served to you or what have you. Is this sort of like an infantilization of a public, that you are saying you can understand your health better if it's a game?
Absolutely. I do think that we've come in the conversation this morning to a point where we really need to understand that when we talk about data for health, it's no longer limited to the laboratory results that are only accessible in your electronic health records, to all other results that are only accessible in your electronic health records, that is sitting on a server in a cellar of some healthcare institutions or a doctor's office server. That's past. We are working. Yesterday we had the Venture Day, and we are working with things like sensors that are doing a real-time analysis of analytes, right? You have multiple analytes that you can, at your home, assess through a device that is all in, lab on a chip. You have sonography for deep vein thrombosis that you can do yourself, coupled to your smartphone, and on and on and on. We are working at the Hasso Plattner Institute at making genetic data available to the person where the sample comes from, and make it understandable through an app, through explanation and comprehensibility tools, so that they understand their own genetic data. Because in the end, when it's about prescribing medicines for that individual, right, the genetic data helps us, informs us what is the right medication to make sure it's effective and to make sure it's safe, right? And nowadays, where does the genomic data live? We've had genomic data conversations for decades, and I am really disappointed that it's no further ahead in clinical medicine. So we are taking the initiative and say genomic data into the app on the smartphone in a safe, secure manner, understandable for the user, and then they can share it with the healthcare provider wherever it's needed. So this is the kind of preemptive new data type and data management for health in the hands of the users.
Right, we're running up the last 5 minutes. You wanted to say something. Can I give you 20 seconds and you 20 seconds?
I couldn't agree with these previous comments more. Why is it that in healthcare we haven't seen accessibility, affordability, convenience, and consumerized experiences the way we've seen over the last 30 years in literally every single other industry on the planet? You can order food and have it at your house in 20 minutes. You can order a car, it's right out front here in 4 minutes. You can book a flight anytime you want. You can send money all around the world. Complex industries, complex setups, different regulatory environments. The only industry on the planet that has not had the benefit of the consumer mobile internet is healthcare. Why? So now, finally we're breaking into that category, right, where all that data is going to become available to people, and they're going to be able to take action on it on their mobile phones. You're going to disintermediate the current doctor-led healthcare system and provide access to affordable, accessible information that people can take action on their mobile phones in the minute, and that's going to transform healthcare as we know it today.
Sorry, Gottfried. I'm just to disintermediate. I mean, the doctor-patient relationship is an incredibly important one, and there have been studies on that as well. And if you take that out, I mean, this idea of consumer choice is like a complete furphy.
But 9/10 of what the doctor does today, at least in the U.S. healthcare system, is administrative. So you have $9 out of $10 getting spent in the U.S. healthcare system today on administrative care. 1/10 is where that doctor should be spending their energy, and the rest of the 9/10, that low-fidelity interaction, should be happening on the mobile phone.
It's just, I really, because you asked before, are we all on the same page? Yes, in this room, actually we are. Outside the world, no, we are not, right? And this is something we have to talk about. We can't sit here and, everyone agrees with everyone.
Yeah, exactly.
The problem's out there. A lot of people are scared. They don't accept that. And from the politician perspective on that, or for the system perspective on that, I think we really have to explain the advantages, right, of digitalization first. Second, we have to stop this, I think, often false debate on the so-called privacy, because it's not the real thing. Right. It's about protecting markets, about protecting old, inefficient systems of delivering healthcare. Yes. And we have to open that, because the change is happening out there. It's happening by entrepreneurs, by companies, but within the regulatory framework, within the system which is steered, it's not happening. And this is something we are always trying to push forward. Last sentence to that. Please. Because we always talk about privacy. We don't talk with the same energy about the question of standardization, about how we open interfaces to have a free flow of data, that my data can really flow with an interoperable way between the certain systems. And this is something we really, I think, have to emphasize on, because if we put the same energy on that, we really could achieve a better outcome in healthcare, and that's our mission. That's our duty to push forward for that.
Gottfried, I was going to give you an extra time token, but we've only got a minute and a half to go. So here we go. I've got one final stone to throw. Wonderful panel here. What about the other nations in the world? We are totally, I'm only half white, but we're all totally white here, and, very middle class or upper middle class, and, Western and all the rest of it. We talked before about the global north and the global south and all these divisions and silos. What about nations of Africa, Arab and Asia? Where are they? Because it's all about personalized medicine, isn't it? We need to get to the individual. That's 7 billion plus, or 8 billion now. Please.
At the Hasso Plattner Institute, I created a digital health master's program where we admit 30 students, and deliberately interdisciplinary and international. And each year with students from Nigeria, from Ghana, from Bangladesh, and from India. And it's incredibly inspiring how motivated and what different perspective these individuals bring to the problem sets that they're facing. And so they are in it. So in Nigeria, they're much more digitally minded, data minded than we think here, than we can imagine in Europe.
20 seconds, go.
Digital and data are meant to remove tensions, frictions, and bottlenecks. That's right. Think about all the countries where the number of healthcare practitioners is way, way below, the ratio we have per inhabitant as here. Digital and data can help increase the health literacy directly and gain some time.
You must defer now. Sorry, our master has taken. Thank you very much.
So now we'll turn to questions from both the physical audience and our digital audience, and we're going to start with one from our online audience. So considering how rapidly technology advances and that political systems are dominated by people who aren't well versed in these technological advances, how well can we expect, I suppose, law and regulation to keep up or even to have the foresight to predict the changes that we're talking about here today?
So,
you're fighting over it.
Please go ahead.
No, well, in the end, it's like in business. Actually, it depends on the persons, right? I think in the last, without giving you the whole commercial spot for the last 3 years of legislation in Germany, but I think a lot happened in that 3 years, and a lot of discussions were actually solved. We had like for 20 years before that. But obviously, the main question for politicians and for a political system is also the public opinion. And we have to convince people out there, also outside of this room, and we have to get in this discussion. Too often, if a politician is criticized by, oh, the minister is stealing the data, I don't hear one voice, or only one voice, and maybe two voices, which support such an initiative. And we have to get in there if we really are convinced, from all the sides, from academia, from business, from wherever, if you really are convinced that the system should, adapt the regulatory framework on that.
Well, I think the regulation needs to keep up, but I think the problem with regulation is usually it's made to fit for the purpose for today.
That's right.
And it should be future-proof. And for example, the pharma legislation in EU from 2001 doesn't take into account, for example, real-world evidence, real-world data, and it's been renewed now, as is the European Health Data Space regulation is coming next year, which will deal with the secondaries of health data as well as the primaries of health data in EU, especially in the cross-border settings. But the question is, will the regulation be fit for the next 10, 15 years, as it should be? And this is kind of legislation we should do, enable legislation that innovations can boom instead of limitation and fit for the purpose for today. So this is a big problem.
I'm keen to throw back to Adam, but I just want to leave one thought there. This idea of making policy fit for the next 5, 10, 20 years, isn't that an old sort of school of thought? I mean, we need to be a lot more agile, don't we?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thank you. Adam.
Let's turn to the audience. We have a question over here, and I'll just remind all our audience questions to ask their question as quickly as possible since we're up against the clock.
My name is Jeanne. I'm the president of the Society for the Advancement of Science and Technology in the Arab World from Jordan. I have 2 points that I'd like your opinion on. One, what are the strategies, first, to include more inclusivity and diversity in the genomic data, because most of it is Eurocentric, and especially with the influx of refugees and migrants in other Western countries, this should be a problem that has to be addressed, and it isn't, in order for us to get to personalized medicine. The other point is, how do we maintain a balance of, because medicine is not just about data, it's also about that human-human interaction, that emotional interaction. So how do we maintain the balance to have the data, but also maintain that human-human interaction so that we could really do better medicine going forward? Because ultimately our health is connected to our behavior and our mental health, which are connected in mechanisms we still don't understand. So those are my 2 questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Jeanne.
So about data and diversity, I think you're absolutely right. We need to have much more diversity in the data, genomic data, but also whatever data set, continuous glucose monitoring, or realizing that there are a lot of parameters we don't take into account because we don't have that diverse view. Just to give you a very concrete example, you know that the mortality in women is higher of cardiac conditions because they are not diagnosed when they got an infarct, because symptoms are different. So we really need to go for a much more, balanced and diverse approach. Now, the human factor versus the data factor. Think about all the time you can save for a human interaction and a human conversation if you get all the background of data crunching, digesting done before and available at the moment of the conversation. And I think this headroom for the practitioners and for the healthcare system we need to recover by using technologies.
Agreed. Oh, and I'm keen to bring you in here, but I just wanted to sort of latch onto that in a way, because, I mean, you raised a very interesting point about migration. And, we talk again about data as though data were equal. It's health data is health data, but it's not. Because if certain people are treated differently in a society, have different rights, whether they are, given or taken or what have you, then they are either part of the data or not part of the data. And I mean, we can talk about anonymized data, but if you don't have the data in the first place, you don't have that data. So, Erwin, how do you do research?
Very clearly. So I have long experience in the US, and there's an initiative that's called All of Us, and it's collecting at least 1 million citizens from around the United States in a large effort for clinical data, genomic data, sensor data, and so on. And they're deliberately now oversampling minority populations, because otherwise it will not happen that we overcome the Eurocentric, pardon me, the Eurocentric approach to science, and also the insights are Eurocentric, right? So oversampling minorities, deliberately going forward, reaching out to the communities in minority populations, where we address not only health issues, but also cultural beliefs and other topics.
Right.
And this is actively going on in a number of the largest studies where population cohorts are being established. But it's not enough. We need more.
But I think that sort of reminds me of something that Mark Ferguson said in a previous circle about this idea of values-based decisions. I mean, that's where politics, society comes into it, doesn't it? I mean, when we talk about health data, we're actually talking about a heck of a lot else, aren't we? How society works together. We can talk about bringing in people in for discussions, but where is this United Nations of health data? And bringing everybody around the table. Everybody who is, because you can do citizens' debates, but you're probably only going to get the people who already know a bit about it anyway and have an opinion. What about those who don't have opinions or don't know that they do have an opinion?
I think, just chasing the elephant in the room, there is an economy of data. We also need to be transparent about that and explain that there is a value chain. And there were several points in the discussion you brought up, and if we don't get the data, because the value chain of data may not be enough, having enough emphasis today on how we collect data. What amount of resources do we put in the collection of the data? And I think it's an interesting question also for the healthcare systems like in Europe, who are extremely structured, and where actually the states are spending a lot of money into collecting data, and they can be value out of their data. And I think we also need to transparently to explain what's the value chain of data, who is paying for what, and who is going to be rewarded for what. And because in a lot of those discussions, we talk about privacy and rules, but the question is on the value chain. And we need to also probably to be a bit more transparent. And also now, we know that one of the major blocks of not having your United Nations health data space is also linked to this value and this ability to get money out of the data.
Thank you.
I'd like to add two
Please.
quick comments. One, I think all the machine learning algorithms and AI that we're doing on health data right now are definitely going to be biased by the lack of certain types of participants, and I think that's something that it's crucial over the next several years, is to start making sure that those algorithms that we develop, don't incorporate inherent bias into that. I think the only way to do that is going to be the democratization of health data through mobile phones. Mobile phones are going to provide, generally speaking, around the world, access to both information, communication, and the providing of that type of data, that'll allow us to improve the lack of bias, in the algorithms of the future.
Thank you very much, Jeff. One last question, 1 minute.
So one other question from the online community. What is the value proposition for patients in digitalizing their health, and how do we assuage the fears of patients, customers, and I would also add assuage the fears of doctors as well in that?
Can I sell my data to you?
Well,
you went first.
Patients
Go on. You got 30 seconds, each of you.
There are very active patient organizations in the EU that are really heavily involved in the European development. So I think it's a good practice to involve them in these kind of discussions, and we are trying to do that in our projects.
Yeah.
Run out, nothing to say?
Well, I think first, the experience is going to be one of much, much better service, much more efficient.
That's right.
That's very, very clear. It's proven, no question about it. We are working with things like micro-incentivization. That's an interesting scheme. We are testing that. lastly, I think people will feel that they're in better control of their health.
Yep. I think the market's going to deliver services that people want and need. And then second, I think we need to get the patriarchy out of the system, democratize it through mobile phones. I think we don't need a bunch of white guys telling everybody how it's supposed to get done.
Thank you, Jeff.
Empowerment.
Empowerment
And transparency on the value chain. I think that's what already was mentioned before. Very important, because if I share my data, right, what is in for me, if it's in the value chain of an industry or of a startup, this could be very interesting.
See, thank you very much for that, Gottfried, because I think, altruism only works if there's a sizable amount of selfishness attached to it. But you're very right. We have gone over time, which I'm very proud to say is true to form. Thank you very much, all of you. Look, I think it's been a very, I would say this is a very interesting debate. I actually have found this quite interesting. I sort of would like to sort of test my master's patience and give you one word in order to wrap, allow you to wrap. What is the wall that needs to fall now in order to get the next thing that is important for you in your position? What wall do you need to fall when it comes to data for health? And we'll start with you, Markus.
Oh, no.
You got... I'm going to do the old buzzer sound again.
One word. It is impossible to say one word, but I'd say One Health. It's a term. It includes animal health, environment health, human health into one concept.
Beautiful. Jeanne.
I think we need to come to realize that it's one health, but yes, one organism. We are all parts of a bigger organism where we all need to contribute so it works better and we can better manage also our health, but our healthcare systems.
Thank you very much. Erwin.
We need to break down the wall of over-regulation.
Nice.
The same thing, regulation needs to fall.
You would say that, wouldn't you?
Transparency and security.
Transparency and security. Thank you to everybody. Markus, Jeanne, Erwin, Jeff, and Gottfried. You've been amazing speakers, and thanks for meeting me with a certain amount of good humour. So that's been very enjoyable for me. I don't really have much else to add other than, watch this space. I mean, I think there's clearly a lot of work to be done and a lot of dialogue to be had, but sort of practical dialogue. So we can only hope that there's more of these sorts of conversations, but really at a basis that does break down those walls so that individuals in their hospital beds or planning their futures really understand what they're doing. And we sort of break down, if I was to say there's one wall that I want to see fall, that is the wall of jargon. Because that's what enables people to understand things better. Thank you very much to all of you. Thanks to you, our audience here. You've been great as well, and our virtual audience as well. Thank you.